Alright, it's another day here working on the racing lawnmower. Haven't picked the camera up yet, but I've done some things and done some tinkering. The last thing I was just doing is I welded up some parts and pieces of the frame solid where it had creases and bends and where you could take stuff apart. So like I welded this all seam solid on both sides, and on the front I welded the front section together. It would just bend down and came to a point. I just welded where it touches back together. Right now I have the transmission back out of it because I got two pulleys. I got a 3-inch pulley for the back, and I had acquired a 6-inch pulley for under the motor. The reason I took the transmission out though is because I want to see if I can make this belt fit. This belt comes pretty close to where the pulley is on the transmission. So my idea is to slot these holes so I can move it forwards a lot, which I have to kind of do anyways to make it so I can tighten the chain up on the, or for the sprocket I should say. So hopefully I can slot the holes enough so I can move the transmission far enough forwards where I can get that belt on there and make it so the clutch still operates without having to buy a new belt. That will mean, however, I'll have to extend this slot out over here so the transmission can fit back in its hole, but that's currently what I've got going on. So in order to fit this belt, I'm going to actually have to move the transmission nearly all the way to the front of those rails, which isn't a problem, but I'm going to have to potentially re-drill all the holes entirely, which is probably a better option than making the slots that long. But with the transmission slammed all the way forwards, it would fit. Okay, I don't remember what I last left off with, but I believe it was moving the transmission forwards. I have the transmission move forwards, and I have the belt in place. The only thing I'm going to do there is take that pulley and mount it over here somewhere to give myself some more belt wrap on the front of this, so there eliminate some potential slippage. I just went through and tightened everything that's important, mounted the fuel tank, and surprisingly enough, the stock fuel tank still fits. Found some hose to use for fuel, and I think I'm going to give her a test fire. We'll see how that goes. Okay, time to start it. Spoiler alert, I may have done this before. Alright, so you've already seen me start it, you know what it sounds like. I now have everything sort of back together so that I could technically ride it. So I'm going to go ahead and start it, put it in first, and see, you know, what happens. The transmission is pretty noisy because it's being way overdriven, unlike its factory setup, which is way underdriven. So the transmission is really noisy, but it's not bound up, I checked. Ta-da! Now to drop it on the ground and ride it. Alright, it's been kind of an interesting morning. It's Saturday, happens to actually be the weekend before Christmas in 2018. And I made an acquisition this morning for a new project in the future. And then I also had to dig into this overhead valve engine for a second. I didn't really show it on camera, but it was having trouble turning over when it wasn't running. And these engines and most lawnmower tractor engines have a compression release system that when it's turning at a super low RPM, like the starter is turning it, it has an extra little bump in either the intake or the exhaust valve that hangs it open for a second to relieve some of the compression, allowing the little starter to actually turn the engine over until it catches. Then once it gets over like 200 RPM, the compression release goes away and it runs, you know, like a top with full compression. So anyways, I popped open this cover because these particular engines are pretty finicky about their valve adjustment. If they get off at all, the compression release won't do what it's supposed to. So it had that type of symptom, so I popped open that cover, and what I actually found was a bent to fucking hell intake push rod. I can insert a picture here somewhere. And for now, what I've done to fix the problem is I just went ahead and straightened it back out with the vise and popped it back in there, adjusted my valves with my feeler gauges to the tighter side of where they're supposed to be to make sure I don't have any, or for now anyways, make sure I don't have any issues with the pressure release not doing its thing. And right now, knock on wood, I have it running right now perfectly. I can bump that key over and it should fire it up, which I was just doing, which is why the door is open right now. So let's, on camera, make sure that can happen again. Oops. I might need to raise the idle up a hair. There you go. I am apparently going to actually have to raise the idle up. It didn't like getting started back up after being run, so it needs a little bit of idle adjustment maybe. Maybe the valves are a little bit too tight now, it's also possible, and it's not allowing it to have good enough compression when it's idling or something, but it'll work for now. Well, so the rest of my day I'm going to go ahead and put together the rest of my brake system. I got the other parts that I needed to make the brakes actually functional, so I'm going to put the camera down and get going on that so I can sort of call the racing lawnmower project finished for now. And just to throw it into this video for shits and giggles, this was my acquisition. This is a Honda Odyssey. This particular one is an FL 250, meaning that it had a 250cc engine in it. It's one of the smaller Odyssey chassis. There is a 350, and there's also a Honda Pilot chassis that had front and rear suspension. So yeah, this is another project that I gotta get going on in the future. I got a spare snowmobile engine lying around that hopefully will go right into there. Same thing, other direction. And yes, it's a Honda Odyssey out of the 80s.